Countrywide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lamp.
New Zealand Pork has just completed the first of its kind carbon footprint assessment, giving us a clear picture of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with pork production. The study evaluated 9 commercial pig farms across the country to find out exactly where emissions are coming from and what the biggest opportunities for improvement lie, or where the biggest opportunities for improvement lie. Joining us to discuss the results and what they mean for the future of Kiwi Pork is Hannah Ritchie, Environment and Planning Manager for NZ Pork. Hannah, welcome to the show. Thanks so much. Really appreciate your time.
Good morning, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Okay, an emissions study or benchmark study on the pork industry. How long has this been underway?
So this has taken probably almost 3 years to get to this point. So we've done a lot of work internally on farm emissions, and then the natural progression for that was to do a carbon footprint looking at pre-farm emissions too. So that work started probably about 2.5 years ago. And as anyone that's done one of these will know, it's quite a process. It takes quite a long time. And so we got the results about a month ago.
Okay. And so what were the results then? And did they surprise you?
Yes and no. So the results, the actual number of the carbon footprint, which was an average of the 9 farms. So we're being careful to say it's not an average of New Zealand pork. It's an average of the 9 farms that participated. It was 5.8 kilograms of carbon equivalent per kilogram of pork produced. Results surprising, yes and no. So that's roughly in the range of what we thought it would be based on international studies, international data. The on-farm component very closely mirrored the work that we've done previously internally. What was surprising is the actual proportion of pre-farm inputs into that total. So the pre-farm inputs, mainly being feed, accounted for about 3/4 of the total emission footprint from the farms that were measured. And that is quite unusual internationally. So that was the surprising part, is that the amount that feed contributed to the total footprint.
So it says 75% of the total footprint was feed. Did that vary on, I imagine it varied on the type of feed too as well, does it? Or does pork get fed a very similar diet?
Generally very similar. In terms of the composition of the feed, the ingredients will vary depending on availability and price and that type of thing. But the composition is very similar across farms. Obviously, the pigs are being fed the optimum diet for health and growth and everything. But the individual ingredients and where those ingredients source would vary between farms. So in particular, the biggest sort of outsized contributor that we found, so it was a relatively small feed input, but with a very big carbon footprint, was soy. So soy meal, soybeans. And the contribution varied depending on where that soy was sourced from as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So imported feed, basically, by the sound of that. I don't think we grow soy, do we?
No, I think there is some soy grown, but I don't think it would be available in in bulk quantities for pig feed and economic scale. So yeah, it's imported feed ingredients. Wheat was obviously a major contributor, but wheat is the major component of a pig's diet. So it's these small imported ingredients that are making up the biggest and outsized contribution to emissions that are the biggest opportunity for us for the future.
Well, that was my next question. So there's the opportunity, right, to alter the feed. And if you can do that, and I don't know anything about this, I'm talking through a hole in my head, but if you remove the soy, and I'm sure it's there for a reason, or altered that, effectively you could reduce the emissions significantly.
Potentially, yeah. And I think it really depends. So one is where it's sourced from. So I think a lot of the soy in this study was sourced from South America. So Brazil in particular, and it comes with emissions associated with deforestation. So it's switching to other sources like North America, where it's the more sustainable production systems can reduce the emissions. But there's also the opportunity for us now to explore other products that could be substituted for soy that have a lower emissions footprint anyway. And it's really early stages because, we only just got this information. It's going to be a process for us to work through, and the individual farms to work through that participated in the study, to figure out what exactly we want to do with the information and what our next steps could be.
So baseline data is really important. That's the reason why you've done it. Okay, that's 75%. What about the other 25%? What's that made up of?
So the other 25, the on-farm emissions, and this is something we've done a lot of work on over the last few years, particularly in response to the emissions pricing policies that were around a few years ago. It's mainly around how pig manure is managed on the farm. So pigs are monogastric animals, they don't ruminate. So on a dairy farm or a sheep and beef farm, most of the emissions are made up from enteric methane. So that's what the animals are breathing out. On a pig farm, that only accounts for about 10% of total emissions. The other 90% is what happens with that manure and how it's treated, and particularly the conditions it's stored in. So whether it's anaerobic or aerobic conditions. Anaerobic conditions produce a lot of methane, a lot of nitrous oxide. So there's a big variation within those 9 farms, a huge variation in the amount of emissions that come from the on-farm component, much more so than the feed.
So hence the average, but also the ability then, once you know that information, to change your practices to reduce emissions.
Absolutely, and there's some really clear and obvious practices. So in particular, effluent ponds, uncovered effluent ponds have very high emissions, and the obvious solution to that is to cover the pond and capture the methane. But unfortunately, that's also a very expensive and not always practical solution. So there are well known and have been around for a long time things that farmers can do to reduce their on-farm emissions. It's just the practicality and the cost of them doesn't always measure up in terms of the benefit to the farm. So there's definitely things we can do, but that's why I think the feed is the sort of more interesting component here, because that's new information to us, and there's potential for us to explore things that we haven't in the past.
So the fact that, and you were careful to point out that this was 9 farms that you studied here, do you think that this would replicate across the country? Is that a big enough sample size to go, hey, this is it?
I think that was our concern, I think, with quite a small sample size. So, I mean, commercially in New Zealand, there's about 60 commercial farms left now. So you're not talking about a huge number to be able to sample from. I think in terms of the on-farm component, definitely, I think it's an accurate representation of national figures, because they very closely mirror what's in the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory for pigs, which covers, obviously, all pigs. The pre-farm, this is where it's still really new to us, and this is why we weren't confident to say this is a New Zealand average, because 9 farms is a relatively small sample size, and without doing more work on getting feed data from a greater range of farms, we couldn't say with confidence that is representative of what all farmers are doing.
Yeah, it's still enough. Do you know, sorry, so you said 5.8 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of pork dead weight. Do you know how that benchmarks across, say, lamb or beef? Or have you done those comparisons?
We haven't, because the type of study that this was, we can't really use this data for benchmarking purposes, because other sectors that have done these types of studies may have used different methodology, just some different system boundaries and things. So we're very careful to say this is a benchmarking internally for us. This is our starting point. We might repeat it in 5 years as a benchmark for us. If we did in the future want to benchmark against other proteins, it would require more work on our part to make sure that was an accurate benchmark. We certainly know in terms of sort of national inventory emissions where pork sits and compared to ruminant animals, and that it is a lot lower because of that, because they don't ruminate, so you don't have that level of enteric methane. So we know that generally pork is a lower emission protein, but we can't say using this study as an absolute, this is, we are this much lower than sheep or beef on a carbon footprint level.
Okay. Just before we wrap, how was it? How was this taken up by the pork farmers themselves? How did they, what they make of it?
We haven't really had that much feedback yet. So this was only communicated to the farmers maybe 2 weeks ago. Each of the individual 9 farms that are participating will get their own summary reports. They haven't actually been published and given to the farmers yet. They're still working through that process. So I think that'll be the interesting part, to see how these individual farms, these individual businesses take up the results and the opportunities associated with it. I think we've got a lot more work to do communicating with farmers to find out how they would like us to use this information. But we're still sort of various stages of that. But there has been a lot of general interest as well from retailers and different sort of sectors as well on the results.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that gets used. All right, Hannah, really appreciate your time. Thank you. Good work and really fascinating numbers, and interesting to see the difference there between the pre-farm and the on-farm numbers. So yeah, I think there's some good stats there. Hey, appreciate it. Thank you. We'll talk again.
Great. Thanks, Andy.
All right, Hannah Ritchie there, Environment and Planning Manager, New Zealand Pork. Yes, some interesting numbers.
Countrywide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam Lamp.